Hi, my name's Amaris. They made my brother head of the vineyard I built from scratch. No warning, no conversation, just a company-wide email that didn't even include my name. And then they used my formulas, my clients, my voice in marketing videos, like I'd never existed at all. I left quietly. They thought I'd fade. But a week later, they lost a $6 million distributor, the one I personally secured and nurtured for years. And now, they're calling me back. But not to apologize, just to survive. Have you ever watched your own family try to erase you while smiling like it's all in your head? Let me tell you what happened next. I remember the exact weight of my suitcase that day. Not just in pounds, but in the way it dragged behind me like something I was no longer willing to carry. My heels clicked against the familiar stone walkway of the vineyard's main office, the rhythm too sharp, too loud for the eerie quiet that greeted me. Usually, the reception desk buzzed with greetings, the hum of printers, phones, voices. But that morning, silence. I glanced at Mia's desk. Empty. Her coffee mug, normally half full and already cold, was missing. The plant she'd babied for months, gone. It didn't make sense. She never took time off without telling me. Still, I moved forward. Maybe everyone was running late. Maybe there was a meeting I hadn't been briefed on, though that had never happened before. I walked into my office, dropped my bag beside the chair, and reached for my laptop. Jet lag buzzed in my temples, but the adrenaline of the week's success still pulsed through my veins. Singapore had been a win. We secured the distributor, doubled our regional presence, and they toasted my name at the final dinner. I was supposed to be celebrating today, sharing numbers, thanking the staff, opening that bottle of reserve champagne I'd been saving for years. Instead, I opened my inbox. There it was. An internal email, subject line, leadership update, immediate implementation. I clicked. Valente Vineyards is proud to announce the appointment of Mr. Cassian Valente as Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. I didn't blink. I didn't scroll, but I saw it all. Signed by the board, my mother, my father, my last name. No mention of me, no thank you, no transition plan, just gone. It wasn't a resignation, it wasn't retirement, it was erasure, like I'd never been there. Like 15 years of rebuilding this company, from a glorified local supplier into a name recognized from Napa to Milan, had been done by someone else. Someone newer, louder, with a smile built for press photos. I forced my fingers to keep scrolling. Maybe there was more. Maybe I'd been moved to another role. Maybe this was a misfire. But then I saw it. Another email, an invite to the annual summer gala. I almost laughed. D. Valenti, logistics support. Not founder, not executive director, not even former CEO. Just a first initial, like I was a part-time intern they couldn't fully place. My hands rested on the desk, not trembling, just still. I didn't yell, didn't storm into anyone's office. What was there to say? They'd made their move. Not in person, not even over the phone. Through a group email. I turned toward the floor-to-ceiling window. The vines outside had changed. They always did. Summer in Napa carried a different scent. Earth warmed by sun, sugar thickening in the grapes. I used to love that smell. It meant progress. Now it just felt ironic. I thought about the years I slept on the couch in that same office, when I sold my condo to fund the rebranding campaign, when I missed my best friend's wedding to finalize the contract with the Zurich hotel chain, when I signed off on firing my own cousin because he falsified shipping invoices. Everything. Every sacrifice made for this place. For our name. No. For their name. I opened my bottom drawer, pulled out the black leather portfolio I kept separate from company servers. Inside, handwritten notes, private contacts, distributor insights. Not company property. Mine. Earned through dinners, red-eye flights, and years of being the steady one when everyone else wanted shortcuts. I zipped it shut, grabbed my bag, and walked out. Not a soul looked up. Not that there were many left to look. Somehow, they'd planned even that. Outside, the sky was the color of old parchment, soft and bright at once, the kind of light that would have made for a perfect product photo. I stood still for a second, just enough to feel the shift in the air. Something was over. Not just my role. Something deeper. I got in the car, started the engine, and didn't look back at the building as I pulled away. There wasn't anything left in there I hadn't already carried out. But that email wasn't the worst part. Not even close. A week passed. One whole week since that email landed like a quiet grenade in my inbox. No smoke, no sirens, just ash and absence. When the call came, I almost didn't answer. My mother's name flashed across the screen, and for 3 rings, I just stared at it. Then, as if my hand moved of its own will, I picked up. "Don't forget the gala this weekend," she said, like she'd just reminded me to pick up milk. "It's still family." Family. That word did more damage than the announcement itself. Still, I said I'd be there. Not to make peace. I wanted to see just how far they'd go to pretend I'd never existed. Saturday arrived cloaked in wine-scented sunshine and curated charm. Valente's summer gala was always their crown jewel. Wooden archways wrapped in grapevines, cheese pairings curated down to the rind, and guests who knew which barrel the vintage had been stored in. This year, I came dressed with intent. No red carpet sparkle, no statement earrings, just a tailored navy jumpsuit and the darkest lipstick I owned. I didn't need to scream to be seen. I only needed to stand still and let the silence tell its own story. The moment I stepped into the vineyard, I saw the first clue. A collage stretched across the entrance banner, titled in looping gold script, "The Evolution of Valente." Rows of photos, moments from trade shows, harvest seasons, international tastings. I searched the wall. I knew the frame size. The photo from Singapore, our biggest expansion yet, should have been there. I remembered standing beside the country manager, holding the ceremonial agreement with pride. But the picture had been cropped. Cassian stood in the center, arms wide. Our parents flanked him. My place? A sliver of hair, a piece of elbow, easily missed. Inside, I moved through the crowd like fog, present but unacknowledged. Someone handed me a name tag, D. Valenti, guest. Not even Amaris. Just a single letter and the word that meant I didn't belong. The main table was set near the fountain, my mother in emerald satin. My father, speaking with someone from a wellness startup. Cassian, of course, in the center, laughing like he'd aged into legacy overnight. I wasn't seated with them. Instead, I was directed to a table in the far corner, behind the buffet setup, close enough to smell the heat lamps. It was the kind of seat reserved for +1s and background noise. I sat quietly, said nothing. My back was to the stage, but the microphone feedback told me the speeches had begun. And now, under new leadership, we continue our commitment to innovation and sustainability, the host said. I turned slightly in my chair. The words floated over me like dust. They mentioned Cassian's vision, his tenacity, his modern rebranding. No mention of the reserve blends I'd spent years developing. No note of the deals I brokered in Tokyo and Toronto. No trace of the nights I spent in that office, poring over soil acidity reports and negotiating shipping routes at 2 a.m. Instead, they praised the new path, as if the old one hadn't carried them to this very peak. My thoughts flickered back to 2013, a harvest gone sideways due to unexpected rain. I'd slept 3 hours a night, coordinated backup pickers, redirected delivery trucks, saved the entire line. And yet, here I was, next to the catering line, watching my legacy evaporate like spilled champagne on sun-warmed stone. A waiter approached quietly, almost apologetic. He placed a glass in front of me. It was my vintage. 2019 Reserve. No label, no flourish. Just the taste I knew by heart. The one I'd built for my grandfather's palate. Oak forward, long finish, made for memory. I met his eyes. He didn't say anything, just nodded and stepped away. Someone remembered. I stayed, didn't speak, didn't excuse myself early. I watched every introduction, every curated anecdote, every forced laugh. They wanted to erase me. What they didn't realize was that erasure only works if the foundation forgets. And I had been the foundation. So I drank. Slowly. Eyes on the crowd. Faces locked in smiles. And sometimes, being forgotten is the first step to being underestimated. The first morning back at the cottage, the fog rolled in so thick it blurred the tree line behind the fence. From the porch, I watched it move like breath. Slow, quiet, deliberate. It was the kind of silence I used to crave, the kind that once healed. But now, it only mirrored the static in my chest. Even here, surrounded by the land I helped restore with grant money no one remembered I wrote, the noise followed me. Not loud, but persistent. Like a hum behind drywall. I set my coffee down without sipping. It was already cold. The email came through while I was sorting through invoices, trying to decide if I'd keep the vineyard as a business asset or let it go entirely. The subject line was simple. Internal thread, not intended for distribution. It had been forwarded by Becca, my former assistant, one of the few people who hadn't tried to rewrite my exit as a sabbatical. She didn't add a message. She didn't have to. The thread was from a senior-level conversation between marketing and executive strategy, marked confidential. It started benign. Transition plans, leadership positioning, PR language. But then it got personal. She's brilliant, but intense. Might be best to transition her out gently, rotate her into silence. Silence. They weren't afraid I'd explode. They were afraid I wouldn't. I printed it, taped it to my fridge next to the quote from my grandfather that used to give me pride. Good wine doesn't shout. It whispers with conviction. I guess they learned that from me and used it against me. Later that afternoon, while scrolling mindlessly to numb the edge, I saw it. A sponsored article from a well-known trade publication. Headline bold and insulting. How Cassian Valenti reimagined a stagnant brand. The piece praised his bold departure from tradition, his intuitive leadership, and the fresh energy needed to reclaim relevance. They even cited the 2019 Reserve Blend as a turning point in the vineyard's appeal to younger consumers. Without mentioning, I created it. The tone wasn't subtle, it was surgical. I clicked through twice to be sure it wasn't parody, but it wasn't. They'd interviewed someone anonymous from the board, called me methodical but inflexible, the kind of leader who built foundations but couldn't scale vision. I closed the screen, then reopened it, and highlighted every lie. Not because I needed evidence. I already had that, but because something inside me needed to look directly at the theft, at how cleanly they'd peeled me off the label without tearing it. That night, I couldn't sleep. So I walked the trail behind the cottage, where the rows of neglected Chardonnay vines still grew wild. I used to think they were sad, unkempt. Now I found comfort in their disorder, honest in their collapse. I remembered Singapore, not the public signing or the gift basket the client sent. I remembered the night before the deal closed, when a compliance officer flagged a last-minute trade clause. No one else stayed up. I did. Cross-referenced, redrafted, translated. By 4 a.m., I had a fix. We got the deal. And now, Cassian was the one giving talks about breaking into Asia with intuition and flair. Intuition? He once asked if Syrah and Shiraz were the same grape, on stage. I stopped walking, sat on the old wine crate someone had dragged to the trailhead, let the cold press into my back. It grounded me. Back at the cottage, I opened my notebook. Not for journaling. I wasn't in the mood for self-help. I made 3 columns. Column 1. Clients who would walk if I walked. I knew at least 6 off the top of my head. Column 2. Vendors who still owed me favors. Label rushes, shipping priority, digital campaigns I rescued last minute. Column 3. Names. People who never got thanked publicly, but who remembered who called at midnight when the fermentation tanks froze. People who'd trust me, not because I was family, but because I was fair. I didn't label the list revenge. This wasn't about revenge. It was about inventory. And the first name I wrote down wasn't a client. It was someone far more dangerous. 3 weeks after the gala, I finally stopped pretending to rest. The cottage, tucked away in the folds of Carmel Valley, had once felt like a sanctuary. Now it just felt like exile with good landscaping. Each morning, the air came in cool through the windows, carrying that clean, wild scent I used to associate with second chances. But now it clung to me differently, like someone else's perfume after a hug you didn't want. I was halfway through trimming the lavender bush near the back steps when the call came through. France. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. Instinct, I suppose. Amaris, this is Leo from Domaine Tissot, the voice on the other end said. Warm, familiar, and clearly uneasy. He paused before continuing. Cassian's team reached out asking for the soil blend specs for the 2020 Rhone exchange. They said it was part of an internal continuity plan. I didn't respond right away. My brain registered the words, but my hands kept moving, snipping a dead stalk, dropping it into the basket, then stopping. They don't own my formulas, Leo. I know, he replied. That's why I'm telling you. After we hung up, I walked straight inside, washed my hands, and opened my files. Not the digital ones. Those had been picked over. I meant the hard copies, handwritten pairings, pH calibration notes, supplier nicknames scribbled in margins, my work, my taste, my legacy, and now my brother was trying to turn it into a toolkit he could slap a new label on. I didn't scream. I scanned. That same afternoon, Becca, the intern I once mentored, sent me 3 screenshots. They were taken from the new internal CRM at Valenti. The header at the top read, Cassian's Client Innovation Protocol. I stared at the images, client tags I developed, notes I wrote, preferences, pain points, even my custom handwritten reminder to send Bordeaux Reserve early to the Parisian buyer who liked to serve it chilled. All of it, stripped of context, repackaged as Cassian's method. No footnote, no mention, no credit. And then, like fate refusing to take a day off, the alert hit my inbox. Introducing Lucent Red, a new vision of Napa. The promo banner made my stomach flip. A sleek bottle, minimal label, bold font. But I knew the curve of that glass. I recognized the exact ruby hue in the lighting. It was my Heritage 97. Same formula, same flavor profile. He'd even kept the aging duration. The only thing missing? My name. I picked up the phone and called Verena. She answered on the 3rd ring, sounding like someone already bracing for impact. Hi, sweetheart. Everything okay? I didn't waste time. He's using my blends, my clients, and my files. If he touches one more thing with my fingerprints on it, I won't stay quiet. A pause. Too long. He's trying to find his own way, she said eventually. You've had the spotlight for a long time. Maybe it's just his turn. My grip on the phone tightened, but my voice didn't rise. This isn't a family talent show, Mom. It's theft. He didn't mean harm. I'm not interested in his intentions. I'm watching his patterns. I hung up. By dusk, I was seated in a discreet office in town with a legal consultant. No lawsuit, yet. Just questions. What constitutes intellectual property in boutique wine production? How many of my contracts listed me by name rather than the company? What could I prove, document, timestamp? It wasn't about vengeance. It was about clarity. Over the next 2 days, I started compiling my own archive. Notes with dates, copies of trade emails, drafted recipes, sourcing timelines, blending trials, all documented and cataloged. I used to think digital backups were for security. Now I knew they were for survival. I saved everything twice, once on a hard drive, once off-site. Because if they were going to build their new empire on my shoulders, I needed to make sure those shoulders didn't bend quietly. And if they thought I'd stay silent, they clearly forgot who taught the vineyard to speak. The first call came on a Monday morning, just as I was finishing my second cup of coffee. It was polite, overly so. One of the board members, whose name I barely remembered, but whose signature had been on the email announcing Cassian's rise to CEO. "We were just hoping," he said, clearing his throat, "you could clarify your long-term involvement with the vineyard. There's a lot of curiosity and, well, stability matters." I said I'd think about it. Then I hung up and didn't think about it at all, because what they wanted wasn't clarity. It was silence. They didn't care if I returned. They just didn't want me lingering in the wings, reminding everyone who'd built the damn stage. Over the next few days, the tone of the calls shifted. "We value your perspective. We want to honor your contributions. We believe legacy means inclusion." They weren't reaching out to invite me back. They were circling like birds, hoping I'd die quietly and leave the air to them. So I stopped answering. By Thursday, my phone rang again. This time, I picked up. Verena. Her voice was warm, like always, carefully measured. The kind of tone she used when asking a neighbor to lower the music, not when speaking to her daughter. "Sweetheart, I've been thinking. Maybe we don't need to make this so formal. You don't have to come back with a title. You could just advise. Be there. Guide him." I waited a beat. "You mean whisper behind closed doors while he gets the credit?" There was a pause, tight and brief. "It's not about credit. It's about unity." "No," I said, voice calm. "It's about erasure. And I don't whisper anymore." I ended the call before she could pretend to understand. That night, I sat at the dining table, lights dimmed, laptop open. My legal binder beside me, worn at the corners. I pulled out the copy of my equity clause, the one that guaranteed me a 35% stake and voting power if any leadership change happened without my consent. I read it slowly. Every word still held. Then I opened the file marked Personal Portfolio. I'd built it over years, clients I'd acquired, notes on vendor relationships, projections, trends. I highlighted expiration dates of upcoming contracts that only I had relationships strong enough to renew. They thought pushing me out meant I'd walk away from the business. What they forgot was that I was the business. If they wanted me gone, it wasn't going to be quiet or cheap. After midnight, I opened a blank document and began typing. "Dear members of the board, I have considered the calls, the invitations, and the narrative being built around my departure. Let me be clear. I am not returning as a consultant. I am not offering guidance from the shadows. You want me back? Then it's on my terms. Co-CEO, full operational authority, public reinstatement, a press statement acknowledging the strategic leadership transition, and a reinstatement of contractual control over my developed client base. If that sounds demanding, understand this. I am not reclaiming power. I'm reminding you where it came from. You'll either name it or lose it. I signed it, dated it, printed it. I didn't send it, not yet. Instead, I folded the letter, placed it in a manila envelope, and slid it into the safe in my closet, next to the deed for the Carmel Valley cottage. Because sometimes, the most powerful message isn't a speech. It's a line drawn so cleanly that no one dares to cross it. But when I finally saw what they did to the brand I built, I knew silence wasn't just a mistake. It was complicity. The invitation arrived not through a call or a text, but as a thick cardstock envelope hand-delivered to my gate. Cream-colored, embossed, scented faintly with orange blossom, just like the ones we used to send when I was still allowed to sign them. Inside, the note was polite, distant, like it had been drafted by someone trying to avoid any emotional liability. Family tasting dinner, no agenda, just food and tradition. I read it twice, set it down, and made no move to reply. I didn't need to. My arrival, or lack of it, would say more than any RSVP ever could. By the time Saturday night came around, I knew exactly what I was walking into. It wasn't about reconciliation. It was a reset staged for comfort. Probably PR. Probably Cassian. But I wasn't going to let them narrate me out of my own legacy. The estate house had been renovated since I left. Reclaimed wood beams, mood lighting, walls stripped of the old harvest photos, and replaced with sleek prints of branded lifestyle shots. It looked less like a vineyard and more like a magazine spread. I stood at the doorway for a moment, adjusting my coat, letting the performance play out before stepping in. Verena greeted me at the door with a tight smile that never touched her eyes. "So glad you made it," she said, voice perfectly modulated. I nodded, stepping past her. Of course, wouldn't want to miss history being rewritten in real time. Dinner was served at the long oak table in the center of the room, now flanked with curated flatware and name cards. Mine read A. Valente. No title, no role. Just enough to say we remembered you exist without acknowledging anything else. Cassian stood to give a toast, glass raised, confidence oozing like overripe cheese. "This new direction," he said, "is all about expansion. Into wellness markets, alcohol-free blends, partnerships with lifestyle brands that reflect the new Valente spirit." He was practically glowing under the spotlight. Then he added, "We're in talks with 3 national chains, and our Virtue line is being picked up by health resorts from Napa to Aspen. It's a new day." I didn't raise my glass. I didn't blink. Instead, I asked, "Did Chateau Roland Blanc say anything about the $6 million deal they pulled last week?" The room snapped into silence. Forks froze midair. Verena stiffened. Silas looked down at his napkin. Cassian blinked. "What?" I leaned back slightly, voice calm. "You know, the Michelin-starred French partner? The one I secured in 2017? They terminated their contract last week, said the rebrand made the product feel like flavored water." His face paled. I wasn't done. "They also said, and I quote, that I was the only reason they stayed as long as they did. That they trusted the palate behind the wine, not the packaging." Verena's color drained faster than the wine in her glass. Silas stayed silent, as he always did when faced with things that made him uncomfortable. Cassian opened his mouth, then closed it again. I placed my napkin on the table, slowly, deliberately, like a closing statement. "You might have changed the labels," I said, "but you don't get to rewrite the vintage." Then I stood and walked out. No dramatic exit. No door slam. Just the weight of what I left behind hanging in the air, like the scent of crushed grapes. Impossible to ignore once it's seeped into everything. Outside, the wind had picked up. I let it hit me full in the face, bracing, clean. I didn't cry. I didn't clench my fists. I didn't rehearse the moment again in my head. I just breathed. By the time I got to the car, my phone was lighting up. Not from family, not from anyone at the table. It was a former distributor from New York. "If you're doing anything new, I want in." Then another, and another. Sommeliers, assistant winemakers, a restaurant group I hadn't spoken to in 2 years. All of them with the same message. Whatever you're planning, count me in. They weren't reaching for nostalgia. They were aligning with strength. If they were hoping I'd crawl back quietly, they should have buried the legacy with me. It started with a headline. Small, subtle, but enough to catch my eye as I scrolled past it during breakfast. Valente Vineyards reinvents itself with bold new leadership. The article didn't mention me, not once. Instead, it spoke in wide, glossy strokes, how Cassian had ushered in a vital new era, steering the vineyard toward relevance with youthful vision and inclusive branding. It was the kind of article written by someone who'd never touched a grape, but knew how to string together market buzzwords. By noon, more were popping up. Industry blogs, lifestyle newsletters, even a featurette in a local tasting magazine, all subtly painting me out of the picture. I wasn't named, but the subtext was there. Burnout, inflexibility, resistance to change. The messaging was coordinated, too smooth to be accidental. They hadn't just replaced me. They'd hired a PR firm to bury me. I didn't react immediately. I bookmarked the pages, cataloged the phrasing, then closed my laptop. The next day, I attended a wine conference in St. Helena. Not as a speaker this time, but a quiet observer. I kept my sunglasses on longer than necessary, stayed in the back row, Didn't introduce myself. Let them believe what they wanted to. Halfway through the keynote, Valente's new promotional video played on a screen large enough to swallow the room. Scenic drone shots, smiling interns, vines basking in golden light. Then a voiceover, my voice. They'd lifted audio from a speech I gave 2 years ago in Bordeaux. Every word, every inflection, and overlaid it with images of Cassian walking the vineyard like a king surveying his kingdom. Afterward, I approached the organizer. She was mid-40s, efficient, and visibly uncomfortable. "That was my voice in your video," I said, calm but direct. She fumbled. We got the file from the Valenti team. I didn't realize, was it not approved? It wasn't theirs to use." She nodded quickly, promising to follow up. But the damage was done. My words, my cadence, had become a mouthpiece for the man who replaced me. That evening, I received a message from a young operations manager at a competing vineyard. Attached was an audio clip from a recent industry mixer. Cassian's voice came through clean. "She had no clue what the market wanted," he said with a laugh. "Brilliant, sure, but frozen in tradition. I had to drag the brand into the present." He kept going. "Called me a perfectionist to a fault," said I. "Couldn't scale," said the vineyard, "needed air, and I took up too much of it." It was rehearsed. That much was obvious. Some PR person had fed him the talking points. But hearing him say it, so casually, like it wasn't just my name he was trading in for clout, burned. I didn't cry. I made a list. The next morning, I reached out to 3 journalists I trusted. People who'd written about me back when I was still the future of Napa instead of the ghost in the walls. I didn't rant. I didn't offer a sob story. I gave them data, trade show awards, export numbers, timeline comparisons. The years when Valenti grew 34% under my direction. The years before Cassian had even joined full-time. Quiet numbers that said louder things than I ever could. I didn't demand a retraction. I just gave them the truth and let them decide what to do with it. Then I sat down to write. Not to the media, not to the board, to Cassian. It wasn't venomous. No capital letters. Just a steady hand and a page of things I never got to say. "You're not my rival," I wrote. "You're the echo of my momentum, and echoes fade." I folded it, sealed it, then placed it inside the bottom drawer of my desk. Instead of sending it, I opened a new document. Restoration, Phase 1. A title, a beginning, a plan. The louder they got, the clearer it became. They didn't fear my absence. They feared my return. The envelope was cream, thick, and sealed with a wax emblem that hadn't been used since I was still leading boardroom strategy meetings. The kind of formal touch meant to signal respect. But to me, it read like overcompensation. Inside was an invitation to a leadership alignment session, scheduled for Friday afternoon at the Valenti Tasting Salon. I knew what it was. A performance, thinly veiled as diplomacy. They wanted to contain the fallout without confessing fault. I was expected to show up, stay civil, nod at the right moments, maybe accept a vague title like Legacy Advisor, smile for a photo, disappear again. I marked it on the calendar anyway. Friday came cold and dry, with a sky so clear it felt like a warning. I arrived on time, exactly on time, not early enough to appear overeager, not late enough to be dismissed as emotional. Neutral, steady. Inside, they were already seated. Silas with his fingers laced like he was steeling himself for a deposition. Verena in her trademark silk blouse, trying to look maternal instead of tactical. Cassian leaned back in his chair, all ease and polished posture. I placed my folder on the table and didn't sit. "Before we start," I said, "you should see this." I pulled out the sealed envelope, opened it slowly, and slid the notarized agreement across the table. Their eyes followed it like a dropped match. "This," I said calmly, "is the equity agreement you all conveniently forgot. Signed by Dad, witnessed by my Aunt Elise, stored in her personal safe, along with this." I reached into my bag and placed a flash drive beside the paper. A video message she recorded before she passed, in case this exact moment ever came. Verena's hand twitched toward the flash drive, but she didn't touch it. Cassian smirked, that same rehearsed grin he wore when bluffing on stage. "That's old," he said. "We've moved forward since then." I met his eyes. "Then you'll understand why I brought a new proposal." I laid the final document on the table. Clean, direct, co-CEO, full operational veto, 35% equity reinstated, brand authority returned. "You want to keep calling this a family legacy?" I asked. "Then act like it. Sign." Silas didn't move. Verena stared at the paper, blinking once, slow, calculating. Cassian scoffed under his breath. "This is extortion," he muttered. "You're strong-arming your way back in." "No," I said, still standing. "I'm correcting math. The market's already responded. We lost 3 vendors this quarter. That wasn't strategy. That was subtraction." Silas was the first to move. Quietly, he uncapped the pen beside him and signed. His hand didn't shake. Verena followed, more slowly, like her pride was caught in her throat. But she signed. Cassian didn't touch the pen. "I'll need time to review." "You have 48 hours, I said. "After that, this goes public. With documents, email threads, and contracts, everything you buried, I've unearthed." He didn't speak again. I gathered the signed copy, slid it into my folder, and paused before turning toward the door. No clapping, no handshakes, just the rustle of papers and the quiet shattering of a power structure that had been built on borrowed brilliance. As I left, I didn't look back in regret. I looked back to make sure they saw who was holding the pen last. Some signatures give you power. Others remind them you never needed permission. The email hit inboxes at 9:03 a.m. sharp on a Tuesday. Effective immediately, Amaris Valente has been reinstated as co-chief executive officer of Valente Vineyards. Cassian Valente will transition into a newly created role as brand ambassador. No congratulations, no commentary, just the facts, plain and stark. It was a memo dressed like a press release, but everyone knew better. You could feel the quiet thud it made as it landed. A collective pause followed. Not outrage, not celebration, just quiet recalibration. I didn't smile when I read it. I didn't forward it to anyone. I simply closed the tab and picked up my pen. By midday, I was walking across the vineyard's eastern slope, the same one I had spent a year redesigning for sustainable irrigation, back when sustainability was a footnote. Now it bore a brushed steel plaque at the gate, Cassian Legacy Estate. No mention of me. Not in the sign. Not in the PR tour posted to social media. Not even in the copy I wrote 3 years ago that they were still using, word for word. I didn't say a word. I took pictures. Back in my office, yes, they gave me my office back, with the nameplate quietly reinstalled, I compiled a request for a full audit. Budget, naming rights, development expenses. I wanted to see how they had financed the rebranding of something I paid for with my own bonus and a personal line of credit. The reports arrived 2 days later. Dozens of pages, neat columns, glossy language. What stood out wasn't the spin. It was the repackaging. Projects I had led had been reassigned under Cassian's name. Reports I'd submitted had been retitled. One even replaced my initials with his. I didn't write a cover note. I simply forwarded the marked-up files to the board with a subject line, "Corrections attached." The next morning, Cassian stormed into my office unannounced, the door bouncing off the wall behind him. "You really had to humiliate me in front of the entire board?" he said, voice sharp, full of wounded pride. I set down my pen. I didn't say a word. He dropped the folder he was holding onto my desk. It slid open, my audit notes. "You're trying to tear me down." "No," I said evenly. "I'm just making sure the record is accurate." His jaw tightened. "This is petty." I held up one page, the side-by-side of my original budget plan, and the edited version with his initials slapped over mine. "These numbers were always mine, Cassian," I said. You just borrowed the credit. For a moment, he looked like a boy who had been caught sneaking into the wine cellar. Not malicious, just exposed. He didn't say another word. Just left the folder on my desk and walked out. Later that afternoon, I took the long walk through the processing barn, past the fermenters, and the new bottling line that still used the temperature settings I'd calibrated. The staff was quieter than usual, but not in a fearful way. Respectful. Watchful. Luis, our logistics manager for 15 years, stopped mid-stride as I passed. "Good to have you back, Amaris," he said, not loudly, just like it mattered. I nodded once, didn't slow my pace. At the edge of the property, I stood looking over the rows of vines I once hand-tagged during drought season, marking the ones worth saving. This place had nearly forgotten its roots, but the soil hadn't, and the people who mattered never really did. The numbers don't lie, but now, I wanted to see who still would. 10 days after the memo went out, the dust hadn't quite settled, but it had stopped choking the air. The flurry of calls had slowed, the tension in the hallways muted to a hum. At the vineyard, there were no more hushed glances when I passed, no awkward backtracking in the meeting calendar. I didn't announce my return with some grand gesture. I simply walked back in, asked for the latest production report, and got to work. The board knew better than to interfere. Cassian? He hadn't shown up to a single strategic meeting since the announcement. His name lingered on a few spreadsheets, but his voice had vanished from the room. I didn't chase it. The work, for once, spoke louder than the politics. One morning, during a quiet update session in finance, a junior analyst flagged something small but sharp. A delay in the registrar's confirmation for ownership updates. "Legal's following up," she said, flipping through the binder. "But the state rejected the ownership changes. Apparently, your name is still tied to the estate deeds and licensing structure. They can't modify it without your explicit consent." I nodded. "Thanks. Forward the original registrar response to the board. No need to escalate yet." I didn't explain, didn't warn. Just let the email land like a mirror on a table. "Here's what you missed while trying to erase me." That same afternoon, a message forwarded from the COO popped up in my inbox. Blind CC, originally from an old contact in France, one of our oldest distributors. "We will resume orders with Valente Vineyards under one condition. Amaris must remain part of the executive team. If not, our collaboration ends." The COO's note was short. I guess they still remember. No need to reply. Some truths don't need underlining. I spent the next week doing what I did best, structuring clarity from chaos. I didn't call press conferences or issue dramatic quotes. Instead, I built a lean, strategic outreach plan. Quiet reactivation of loyal clients, subtle supplier negotiations, one press release about leadership alignment, buried beneath harvest updates. No interviews, no revenge tours, just results. There was something sacred in the silence. It was the kind of power that didn't roar. It resonated. On Friday afternoon, I wandered into the barrel room. The air smelled the same as it always had, oak, earth, and faint vanilla. And yet, it felt different. The whiteboard against the far wall caught my eye. There, in clean blue marker, was the original blend schedule I'd written 4 years ago. Someone had redrawn it from my old records and updated the dates. No edits, no attribution, just restored as it had been. I walked further in. 2 junior staffers stopped what they were doing as I passed. One nodded. The other said, without preamble, "It's good to have you back, Ms. Valente." I nodded. Not because I needed the words, but because I respected the weight behind them. Luis, our logistics manager, was at the far end of the room, clipboard in hand. When he saw me, he smiled. A small, genuine thing. The first time in a year. It wasn't victory with fireworks. It was something quieter. The return of rhythm, of recognition, of order that didn't need to announce itself to be real. They thought stripping my title would erase my footprint. But power doesn't sit in signatures. It lives in memory. The text came late on a Wednesday night. Sunday dinner, just family, no agendas. Mom. I stared at it for a while. Not because I didn't understand, but because I knew exactly what it meant. It wasn't about food. It was about control, disguised as comfort. But I didn't delete it. I didn't ignore it, either. That Sunday, just as the sun dipped low over the vineyard, I walked up the same front steps I hadn't touched since I left the estate house months ago. This time, I brought a bottle of my own blend. No label, no branding. Just glass, cork, and memory. The dining room looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, just emotionally. The table was simply set. No printed menus, no cameras. Just real napkins folded with effort, and a centerpiece someone had clearly thrown together last minute. Cassian was already seated, chewing slowly, not looking up. Silas sat at the end, his usual post, flipping a fork absent-mindedly between his fingers. Verena moved between kitchen and table like she used to, but the warmth was gone from her movements. She offered a quiet, "You look well," and I nodded, setting the bottle down with care. Dinner started with awkward small talk. Weather, crop reports, a new distributor in Oregon. Cassian avoided my gaze entirely, as if eye contact might ignite something combustible. I let him be. Halfway through the meal, while Verena was pouring more wine into her own glass, Cassian muttered, almost to himself, "Your name still isn't allowed in certain onboarding decks? HR said it's cleaner that way." I didn't blink. "You can scrub a name from slides," I said, voice even. "It's harder to erase it from memory." The words hung there. No one challenged them. They just sat in the room, undisturbed, like dust on untouched shelves. Verena cleared her throat. "We didn't handle things well, I'll admit that." She folded the napkin in her lap with unnecessary precision. "I think we underestimated how much this place was built around you." I didn't flinch, didn't smile. There was no apology in her tone, just the confession of someone adjusting her version of history. "I didn't need credit," I said. "I needed respect." She didn't answer. After we finished, the kitchen settled into the soft clinks of clearing plates. I stood beside Verena at the sink, drying dishes while she washed. It was almost familiar. "Do you think you'll stay?" she asked, not looking at me. I considered that. "Not to belong," I replied, "but maybe to finish what I started." It wasn't a promise. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a declaration that this chapter wouldn't end in exile or bitterness. I wasn't here to be accepted. I was here because I chose to be. Because this vineyard wasn't theirs alone to define. Sometimes rebuilding begins not with forgiveness, but with firm boundaries. I stood where it all began. The hilltop behind the vineyard had always been my compass. Before the restructuring, before the speeches, before the headlines, this was where I used to walk, mapping out ideas no one else believed in yet. Below me now, the new visitor center gleamed under the midday sun, its glass facade catching reflections of rows I once planted, harvested, rebuilt. There was no ceremony, no ribbon cutting, just workers packing up the last of the tools, cleaning the site, resetting it for its soft opening next week. The project had gone ahead without PR, just quiet blueprints and wire transfers under my name. I didn't want credit in brochures. I wanted alignment. In my hand was the signed agreement. 3 signatures, time-stamped and irreversible. Cassian was out, fully. Not suspended, not shifted. Out. Verena had formally surrendered her voting rights on my equity. The clause was short, clinical, but when I read it the night before, I could almost hear her breath hitch before the pen hit paper. And Silas. My father had written a public letter to the industry magazine we'd once fought over during an editorial rebrand. In it, he said, "There is no Valente Vineyards without Amaris." She didn't inherit this role, she defined it. It wasn't negotiated. It was leveraged. I didn't ask. I laid down data, legacy, silence like chess pieces, and waited for them to realize I wasn't moving off the board. Later that afternoon, I returned to my office. The last time before I planned to restructure the entire space. The nameplate had been cleaned. My desk reset. No flowers, no note. Except for a small wooden box. Inside it was a bottle of Heritage 97. No company label. Just a handwritten note wrapped around the neck. Some of us never forgot. I knew the handwriting. Mateo. One of the original cellar masters. Fired during the early PR purge when he refused to rewrite origin stories. I hadn't spoken to him in years. And yet, here it was. Proof that memory sometimes ages better than wine. I walked to the new brand guide draft sitting by the printer. The cover was simple. Valente Vineyards, 2025. Strategy Overview. I flipped to the page I always turn to first. Tagline. Rooted in truth, poured with clarity. Role designations. Founder, brand architect, legacy holder. Not daughter of, not marketing contributor, not advisor, just mine. I signed it with the same black pen I'd used on our first export contract 15 years ago. The pen had a crack in the barrel now, and the ink skipped once, but it still wrote. So did I. With the day slipping into late afternoon, I slipped on a jacket and walked the vineyard path one more time. The gravel shifted under my boots, the same sound I remembered from my 20s. Only now, it was quieter. Not because I'd grown dull, because I no longer needed to prove presence with noise. Luis passed by with a clipboard, tipped his head. Visitor center looks solid. You did good. I nodded. We all did. The vines were heavy with early winter pruning, coiled, waiting, just like me. As I reached the top of the slope again, I pulled the cork on Mateo's bottle. The scent hit instantly. Oak, memory, defiance. I poured a small glass, raised it toward the rows below, and whispered more to myself than to anyone else. I didn't need to burn the house down. I just needed to remind them who laid the first stone. Legacy isn't inherited. It's built. And mine has roots deeper than their silence ever reached. They say time reveals everything. But sometimes it's not time, it's pressure. And when you've carried something long enough, pressure doesn't just expose the cracks. It teaches you where the foundation truly lies. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that silence doesn't always mean surrender. Sometimes it's strategy. Sometimes it's the most powerful language we have. Legacy isn't about being loud or being liked. It's about staying rooted in who you are, even when others try to rewrite your story. So here's what I'll leave you with. Don't let someone else's version of your worth become your truth. Protect your voice. Stand by your values. And if the room forgets your name, make sure your impact still echoes through the walls. What about you? Have you ever had to take back something that was yours all along? Have you ever been written out of a chapter you built from scratch? Let's talk about it. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. If this story spoke to something in you, hit that like button or type 1 in the comments to let me know you're with me. And if it didn't hit right, that's okay too. Tell me why. I read every word. If you want more stories like this, real, raw, and rooted in truth, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We've got more coming, and I'd love for you to be part of it. See you in the next story.